Thanks for standing by and welcome back to the NWR Virtual Healthcare Conference. Next up, we've got Dr. Rowan Hockings, CEO of PYC Therapeutics. PYC Therapeutics is a clinical stage biotech company creating a new generation of RNA therapies to change the lives of patients with genetic diseases. The company utilises its proprietary drug delivery platform to enhance the potency of precision medicines within the rapidly growing RNA therapeutic class. The company is the first to progress a drug candidate for a blinding eye disease of childhood into human trials and is progressing 2 more drug candidates with disease-modifying potential. Once again, a reminder, if anyone has a question in the audience, please feel free to type it in using the function within Zoom. But I'll now hand it over to Rowan.
Thanks very much, Matt, and also for the opportunity to present. A very impressive introduction, so I'll try and live up to the fanfare. The objective for today is really quite straightforward. It's a short and simple presentation. It's an introduction to PYC Therapeutics for those of you who are not familiar with the company. And then it's really a reflection on the 4 features that excite me about the company and the journey we're on, with a particular focus on the next 12 months, what's happening later this year and early next year, because as a company, we're in a very exciting window where we are now generating the human data readouts that really reflect the currency of our industry, and therefore will be of great interest to those who are either invested or potential investors in the organisation. So by way of brief introduction and building on what Matt has already said, we are a clinical stage drug discovery and development company, and we create precision medicines for patients who have got severe diseases and who don't have any treatment options available to them today. And we do that in a very specific way. We make a class of drug called a disease-modifying drug. So these are drugs that address a disease process at its root cause. And the really exciting thing about these drugs is that they have not only the potential to, in some cases, stop progression of a disease as a consequence of that, but in some specific indications, there is actually also potential to reverse disease processes that are already underway. And so from a patient impact standpoint, that is very exciting. From a drug developer standpoint, we are embarking on this journey with a team across 2 offices. We've got our upstream operations, bench science, drug discovery and preclinical work happens in Perth, Western Australia. And we have a team of specialist translational, regulatory and clinical experts who sit in San Francisco in the US. As Matt mentioned, we are a platform technology based around drug delivery, but we have really progressed past the concept of the platform through to the products that we have built from it. And we have managed to create ourselves a pipeline of drugs that are first in class and potentially best in class for the 0.1% of the patients or the population who have one of the 4 diseases listed on this page and who don't have any treatment options available to them today. And so you can see from the developmental stage here that we've got one asset that's just finishing up in early stage clinical trials, about to move through to mid-stage trials in Q2 of this year, and potentially moving through to a registrational study kicking off in the first half of next year. And we have 2 other fast follower assets in ADOA and polycystic kidney disease that we expect to be in the clinic by the end of this year. So a very significant undertaking, particularly for an Australian company. The magnitude of the ambition is certainly very large. That's the introduction to the company, and now just a moment of reflection on the dimensions of what we do that are really exciting to the staff at PYC and to me. The first one of those we touched on before. We're creating drugs for patients who don't have any treatment options available to them at all today. And as Matt mentioned in the introduction, for the first blinding eye disease that we've put our asset into clinical development, this is the first ever drug that has made it into a clinical trial for patients who have this blinding eye disease. They start to manifest symptoms around the age of 6 years old, and they progressively lose their vision until they are declared legally blind in the 4th decade of life. So you can imagine 40% loss of your quality of life when you go blind, and outside of death, it's the physical ailment that humans fear most. The prospect of not having any treatment options available at all today that impact that disease process, there is great hope amongst the patient population and community that we have a potential therapeutic option for them that is now emerging through the human safety and efficacy signals in this clinical trial. And that's mirrored for the 2nd and 3rd drug program and also the 4th neurodevelopmental disorder that's coming further down the pike. These are a very special class of drugs, and this is the second feature that excites us, is that not only do they have the highest probability of success in human trials, which is around 5 times the industry average. So we know the industry as a whole doesn't perform very well through clinical development, that only about 10% of drugs that start the clinical trial journey will ultimately make it through to market. What PYC does is we focus on the very simple end of the disease causation spectrum. So we will only pursue a disease that is caused by a mutation in one gene and one gene only. So we know precisely what is going wrong in the human body and exactly what we need to do to fix it. That's the concept of the precision medicine. And what that translates to is that when you know how you need to correct the behavior of a cell, this is very well characterized, you have a much, much greater prospect of success once you reach the stage of human trials. And so we look at figures around 50-60% chance of a successful market entry after starting a human trial as compared to the industry's 10% standard. And just jumping back up to the point above it, not only that, but we've got a further advantage in that we've taken some of our traditional phase 2 risk, the human efficacy signal, and we've brought that into the preclinical domain because we have grown ourselves a human organ with the disease outside of a human in which we've tested and validated our drug before we start those clinical trials. And I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. The next feature, outside of the patient impact, there's tremendous derivative commercial impact as well. So we target what they call blockbuster or mega blockbuster markets. Each of the indications that we're going after is valued between $1 and $10 billion per asset per annum. So they're very, very attractive commercial markets to be in. And as I mentioned before, the rubber meets the road over the course of the next 24 months. We're going to read out human safety and human efficacy in all 3 of those programs that you saw at the top of the pipeline on the preceding page. So those together create a very, very differentiated profile for PYC, and it's what keeps us coming back to work each day. There is a huge amount of excitement within the organisation as we start to see these data points coming out from human studies that will appear as soon as next month. Actually, we're reading out the initial safety data from the high-dose cohort in our single ascending dose study. We're currently in preparation to transition to a multiple dose study in that same indication. This is what a mini human organ looks like. And so if I take your attention first to the right-hand side of the page, many of you will be familiar with the vision of a normal looking kidney there. If I swing you all the way over to the left-hand side of the page, this is what the kidney of a patient with polycystic kidney disease looks like. And you can see these large number of cysts that ultimately become fluid-filled and destroy the architecture of the kidney as they expand. That results in loss of the function of the kidney, and more than half of these patients will need a kidney transplant by the age of 55. And just to put it in context for you, your and my kidney weighs somewhere between 700 and 800 grams. The kidney of a polycystic kidney disease patient will ultimately weigh around 22 kilos. So you can imagine the impact of that on the patient's life. What you're seeing here in this image on the left-hand side of the page is the same human kidney. So we have taken a tissue sample from one of the patients who is undergoing renal transplant because they have end-stage renal failure. So they are going to receive a donor kidney, and their polycystic kidney is going to come out of that patient. And what that means is that we have access to a human organ that is outside of a human. It's a very valuable thing for us because it gives us the opportunity to have a look at efficacy in the context of a human disease tissue before we have entered into a clinical trial. And so what we do is we take that tissue sample and we grow it in a 3D format. So you're seeing here, these jellyfish-like structures are the microscopic versions of what you can see here at the macroscopic level. So this is a 3-dimensional human kidney with these cysts that are mirrored in the diseased kidney on the left-hand side. And following a single dose of PYC-003, the third asset in our pipeline, you can see a very profound impact on both the size and the number of those cysts. This is a very, very powerful readout for a human precision medicine to have such a profound impact in terms of the disease progression, and given the very proximate link between the pathogenesis here, or how this process is ultimately relating to the destruction of the organ and the disease phenotype or the symptoms that we see in patients. So this was a very, very exciting readout for PYC, and we're extremely hopeful that as we push this asset into clinical development next year, we see the same thing that we've seen in the human kidney outside the human, in the human kidney inside the human. The particularly exciting thing about this particular program is that in the animal models of this disease, if you can replace the missing protein, as this investigational drug candidate does, not only do you stop the disease from progressing, but so long as the patient has not progressed to scarring or fibrotic change within the kidney, you can actually reverse these cysts and restore the normal anatomy and the normal function of these kidneys, so potentially saving these patients from a renal transplant. So that is extremely exciting for us, and it's attracting a lot of attention within the industry right now. Coupled with the point that I made before, this is a single gene disease. This is a disease caused by a mutation in one copy of the PKD1 gene. So we know exactly what we need to do to repair that defect. That translates to this extraordinary uplift in terms of the propensity for clinical success, as you see quoted here, and very nicely illustrated by one of our peers who has the same strategy as PYC, a company called Alnylam. It's a complicated graph, but I'll draw your attention to the grey box on the right-hand side. This is a probability of success, so it's just a percentage figure that is cumulative. So this is phase 1 all the way through to market. You just see the breakdown, phase 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to regulatory approval, but this grey box encompasses the entirety of the journey. This is the success rate for genetically validated targets. So you see Alnylam suggesting that they are 64% likely to have a successful market entry when they launch a phase 1 study, as compared to the industry average down here around the 10% figure that we spoke about. So if you're thinking about a way, and remember these are very attractive commercial markets, to address the one issue that investors really don't like about biotech is that there are very low success rates in the context of these very expensive clinical trials. If you can tilt the table hugely in your favor from a POS or probability of success standpoint, but keep the value of the commercial market exactly as it is, you're in a very happy place as an organization, and hopefully that's where we find we are going to be as these human readouts come to hand, in a very similar spot to Alnylam, given the proximity of the strategy. And you can see here they're calling out what is the driver of that delta. It's the genetic validation of the target. There is no higher form of genetic validation than pursuing single gene diseases. So this is a critical concept for people to understand that differentiates PYC from a lot of our drug development peers. And as we push these drug candidates through towards commercialization, we are starting to get within reach of revenue generation. And I think that it's nice to know where the journey is going to take us, but the very important thing for investors to understand is that you don't need to wait for there to be a top line in order to generate enormous returns within this industry. Really, it comes down to whether or not we can answer two questions favorably. Is the drug safe in humans, and does the drug work in humans? We don't need to wait for the revenue generation. So long as we have answered those two questions unequivocally and favorably, we know that we will be the first to launch a drug product that has the potential to modify a disease in the context of a very attractive commercial market. Patients are literally waiting for these drugs. So what you see when they are launched is a very rapid uptake. Some of our peers in different indications have seen 80% of peak sales reached within 18 months of launch. So from a commercial standpoint, these are very attractive assets as well, and consequently, they generate a lot of buzz in the industry. The great thing now is that we've been talking about the concept for a very long time, and the ambition of putting these drugs into human development. That stage is now past us, and we're at the point where we're starting to read out very important data points. So we've called out 6 of them. There are more, but these are the highlights to look out for over the next 5 quarters. What you can see here is the readout of that phase 1 SAD study, and then shortly thereafter, you've got the readout of the multiple dose study that is about to start in Q2 here. This is an open label format, so we'll be having data drops through the course of the journey, and you're actually starting to see some of the inferred data from a safety standpoint through the decisions of the Safety Review Committee that have enabled us to increase the dosing from the low to the mid and then subsequently the high dose cohort. In April, we'll be looking to make an amendment to that protocol in the context of a very clean safety profile observed to date to add even higher doses to ensure that we are not leaving ourselves short as we transition to a pivotal study in the early parts of next year. A very important readout coming in the immediate future. So in April, we're going to have a look at the non-human primate or monkey data that shows the distribution of the drug that you saw successfully impacting polycystic kidney disease in a non-human primate kidney. So we'll establish a safe and well-tolerated dose of the drug, and then what we'll do is we'll have a look at how much of the drug is in the non-human primate or the monkey kidney. At that dose, we can link that across to the concentration that we used in the patient-derived model that came out of the human with end-stage renal failure. And between those two data points, you get very, very strong conviction that when we submit the regulatory brochure to enable this human clinical trial to commence, that we get a nice indication of what's going to happen as we push that drug candidate through to market. We've actually got a second blinding eye disease drug that's going into the clinic very soon as well. So it's a lot going on from the PYC standpoint. That's exciting because if we are in 3 concurrent phase 1/2 studies and the company has made an explicit decision to invest across the pipeline through the downturn within the industry, waiting for the macroeconomic improvement that we're now starting to see filter through the US, if we have got milestones that are determinative for our future and coming thick and fast in the phase 1/2 studies, we know that these assets have got a very high conversion ratio through phase 3. And so if we can establish clinical proof of concept in those phase 1/2 studies in a robust format, we have very good reason to expect that we'll see that repeated in the context of a registrational study, particularly interesting in the last couple of months because we have seen the US regulator, the FDA, come out and make very clear statements of intent with respect to the desire to accelerate some of these drugs to patients. So there is actually the prospect that we can move these through faster, but that is subject to a conversation with the FDA that the company is going to have through the course of this year. Oh, I did have one more page there. Yeah, great, it's coming now. So this is an investment bank page. This is not from the company, but it's just a really nice synthesis and recap of what to look for in companies that pursue rare diseases, and PYC is one of those. They've referred to the 3 features that are most critical here as the Holy Trinity. We do have long-term exclusivity. We have a very fresh composition of matter patent portfolio. We target patient populations that are much larger than these ultra-rare indications. So we impose a barrier of at least 5,000 patients in the Western world. So they're very commercially attractive, as you've seen before. We're now in the position where we have seen the drugs be effective, show an excellent efficacy profile in the context of the human 3D organoid model, the model of the human organ outside of the human. The last step here to satisfy the Holy Trinity criteria is for us to demonstrate that efficacy profile in a human. And those are the readouts that we've just spoken about that are coming in the very near term. If you tick all 3 of these boxes, the reason that you care about that from an investment standpoint is this bar chart on the right. This is showing you a graph of pre-commercial, that's us, we don't yet have a top line. Companies that satisfy all 3 of the criteria have a median enterprise valuation in US dollars of $3.5 billion US dollars. So that's an order of magnitude or 10 times where the company is capped at today, and we are very close to reading out on those milestones. We can go the next step of the journey once we have established efficacy in the early stage clinical trials. If we take those drug candidates through to market, you see that valuation jump up to $12 billion US dollars. So there's a very clear investment case for PYC in the event that we are able to demonstrate efficacy. This typically relates to companies that have a single asset. PYC has a lot more diversification within its portfolio than that, and we're also pursuing some very, very attractive indications from a commercial standpoint. There's a lot of focus within the industry right now on assets that have peak sales potentials of $5 billion or more, and we've got 2 assets that fit that category within the pipeline, justifying a lot of interest and attraction to that polycystic kidney disease asset in particular that we're about to read out in April for those monkey studies that are going to inform progression into the human trials in Q4 this year. So a lot to take in, albeit hopefully quite a simplified version. So Matt, I'll stop there and throw back to you to see whether we have any questions.
Thanks very much, Rowan. Yeah, just a reminder once again, please feel free to submit a question within Zoom. We've got about 5 minutes and we'll get through as much as we can. Rowan, as I think a few people who've joined would know, you've just announced some great support from a capital raise, which is ongoing admittedly, but can you just talk about the runway that provides the company and maybe a little bit about what milestones that'll also bring you to?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So we have just completed the institutional component of a rights issue, an ANREO, and we're looking to come out of that transaction as a whole, obviously pending the retail uptake, but we think we're going to be somewhere around the $100 million mark from a cash runway standpoint when we factor in the R&D rebates that are receivable in Q3 this year and then again next year. And that really gives us a lot of dry powder to push deep into all of those milestones that we've just shown you. In particular, what we've got coming in the next 5 quarters, if we are successful there, should engender a very material re-rate for the reasons that we've just discussed. So we're in a good position. We're a lot leaner than some of our US peers, and you get a lot of bang for your buck, given the capital efficiency of that R&D rebate in Australia. So very much looking forward to those 3 clinical proof of concepts, human safety, human efficacy data coming within the next 24 months.
Thank you. And I mean, the polycystic kidney disease opportunity, I remember from that announcement, it's very significant. So can you just give a little bit more context on that as well?
Yeah, this is a disease that affects 1 in every 1,000 people. So the reason that there's so much interest is because it's so common, right? And it's a devastating disease from a patient perspective. They first notice that they have the condition either, genetically inherited, but from a symptomatic standpoint, usually in their 20s or 30s. It's characterized by sudden onset acute abdominal pain that has a very profound impact on those patients' quality of life. Their renal function progressively deteriorates. And I think we all know someone who's been on dialysis at some point, and that is the consequence of having non-functional kidneys. We know that 60% of those patients will require a renal transplant by the age of 55. Given that there are no effective treatments out there for patients today. So there's, from the patient impact standpoint, there's a huge unmet need. The commercial value of that market is somewhere between $10 and $20 billion per annum in North America alone. It's a huge impost on the healthcare system and patients' lives, as we've spoken about. And then I think the really exciting thing is what we've seen in the animal models of this disease, which is if you are able to take a disease-modifying drug, a drug that addresses the underlying cause of this disease, and replace the missing protein, not only do we have the potential to stop the disease from progressing, but there may also be a possibility to reverse some of the damage that's already been done. We know this particular cell type in the kidney has got regenerative capacity, and if we are able to see that in these clinical studies that are coming out, that really is going to be a watershed moment and fulfillment of a lifelong dream, I think, for many of the scientists at PYC.
And just one more quick one before we wrap up. You've obviously got a presence in the US as a company. Do you expect that will, continue to or help generate, potential investment or partnering opportunities? And that also relate to another question that's come through where one of the listeners has asked about the strategy around commercial partnerships. So can you just finish with a bit of colour on that?
Yeah, sure. So at the minute, our team in San Francisco is very much focused on the technical dimension. So we've got scientists there who are translational scientists, regulatory scientists, and clinical scientists. So it's more in the technical domain than the commercial. It's been a pretty significant downturn through the industry recently. So we've retreated from the ambition of establishing a broader commercial presence. That's starting to change now as the yield curves start to come back down and people get confidence that rates are coming down. So we're definitely going to look at that, but it doesn't stop. BD is a global activity these days. The international pharmaceutical companies know that there are developments worldwide that are relevant to them, and we maintain ongoing dialogue with those guys. From a partnering aspiration standpoint, we are very comfortable continuing to progress these assets through to market. We know what they are likely to do from a commercial standpoint if we can demonstrate clinical impact, and I think the industry is very well aware of that as well. So I don't think we're going to have any shortage of interest in the event that we can generate the clinical data that we're looking for. We're actually quite interested in pushing further independently to try and increase the commercial leverage and negotiating strength that we have in those discussions. It's possible for us to launch these products in market ourselves. We know that from Sarepta Therapeutics, a company that has gone all the way on that journey. We don't rely on the sales and distribution channel of a big pharma in order to reach our patient population. They are known to the disease registries that are running the clinical trials, and the KOLs are very aware of these drugs. Having said that, if somebody puts a really attractive term sheet across the table, in particular for an asset that is further advanced in clinical development, one of these blinding eye disease drugs, we'll certainly sit down and have a look at it with a view that we reinvest the proceeds of that deal into pushing that jewel in the crown, the kidney asset, much deeper into the human data generation window.
That's a great answer. Thanks very much for your time, Rowan, and thanks to everyone for listening. And we'll leave it at that. But really looking forward to monitoring the progress going forward.
Thanks very much, Matt.